It's time for a flight to Minneapolis. No intro, I was rushing this time here in Atlanta. Well, I normally like to start off these videos with a nice introduction in the terminal. A really short connection here in Atlanta meant running to my connecting gate, and the only moment I had to stand still was on the jet bridge, waiting for those ahead of me to board. In any case, I'm now seated inside November 358 Delta November, a 5-year-old Delta A321 that's about to leave the T-gate area of Atlanta and head on up to the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. This flight today is going to be presented to you from a strictly air traffic perspective. From taxi to takeoff to the approach to landing, you'll learn how this flight operated with the assistance of hard-working controllers on the ground. Rather than focusing on seat pitch or service, this is all about where we are and how we fit into the big picture. We've already left the gate after receiving clearance from the ramp controller, who made sure that ramp number 1 between the T and A gates was safe for us to push back on. After this, we'll be talking to Federal Aviation Administration employees who are in various air traffic control facilities to guide us along the way. Our initial contact with the FAA will be with a controller right here in the Air Traffic Control Tower at Atlanta, who handles traffic on the taxiways. Let's get started by contacting the ground controller at the busiest airport in the world for taxi instructions to runway 26 left, one of 5 parallel runways here.
Ground on 2654, 1 north with November.
2654, we're at Atlanta ground, right? Give way to heavy 76 off Victor, 26 left via Foxtrot.
Give way to the 76 off Victor, 26 left via Foxtrot on 2654.
Our call sign is Delta 2654, and we called the ground controller at 1 north. 1 north means that we're on the first ramp between the T and A gates, and we're about to leave the ramp on its north side. The controller told us to give way to a 767 off taxiway Victor. Victor is a taxiway off to the left used for arriving flights on runway 26 right to go around the runway we'll be using for takeoff, runway 26 left, so they don't have to cross the departure runway. Often referred to as the Victor Loop, it actually descends below the surface of the level of the runway, so departing aircraft don't interfere with arriving aircraft. We need to make sure that the 767 that just arrived is clear of us before we can proceed to runway 26 left via Foxtrot, as instructed. We were able to continue along without stopping and turn right on taxiway Foxtrot. The 767 had progressed far enough so that there was no need for us to have to stop. That 767 will continue along to its gate to deplane its passengers, and we'll just continue along parallel to the departure runway for takeoff. Even though we just started, you can see how important the controller was to ensure that we didn't get in the way of an arriving flight sharing part of the same surface area with us. Let's take a moment to listen into the ground controller talk to other aircraft at this really busy airport. Note that there's another ground controller on the other side of the airport for aircraft using the south complex of runways.
Envoy 3396 at Atlanta ground, section 1.
Taxi 1, Envoy 3396.
Touch 7, give way to 1 Delta out of ramp 3.
Give away to 1 Delta out of ramp 3, Delta out of.
Delta 1053, Atlanta ground, November turn, 26 left, taxi, follow the company Airbus from your left.
Follow the company Airbus from the left, 26 left, Delta 1053.
Delta 1923, Montero 119.3. Tower 4151, Tower 193.
19.3, South 4151.
Yeah, my mistake. 19.1 for Tower. South 4151, it'll be 19.1.
As we taxi along, our flight deck crew has to always keep an ear open for any further instructions and to maintain situational awareness. As we get close to the runway for takeoff, the ground controller tells us to switch frequencies to another controller in the tower, the tower controller, who's handling traffic on the runway.
Delta 2654, Montero 119.1.
19.1, Delta 2654.
Before we're told to line up on the runway, the tower controller issues takeoff clearance to the flight ahead of us. Then, we're told to line up and wait.
Skywest 4151 on Snuffy, 126 left, clear for takeoff.
On S72 left, clear takeoff, Skywest 4151.
2654, Atlanta Tower, 126 left, line up and wait.
26 left, line up and wait, Delta 2654.
We can now line up and wait, and from this side, we get to watch the aircraft that was just clear for takeoff take off. A plane that just landed on the parallel runway is going to be told to taxi via the Victor Loop so that we can get immediate takeoff clearance without stopping. This way, that aircraft won't have to cross in front of us.
Actually, let's do the Victor Loop today. That's the fun. Taxi on the Victor Loop, please.
Victor Loop, Delta 1596.
You can see that arrival there, Delta 1596, which will not be crossing our runway, so the controller can now issue us takeoff clearance right away behind the CRJ 900 that's about to become airborne. What a fast-moving operation.
Delta 2654, RNAV to impasse, runway 26 left, clear for takeoff.
RNAV impasse, 26 left, clear takeoff on 2654.
1053, line of tower, runway 26 left, line up, wait, traffic will be downfield.
26 left, line up and wait, Delta 1053.
We were just issued takeoff clearance, and the A320 behind us was told to line up and wait. This tower controller is launching one plane right after the other, and it's possible in Atlanta with so many runways to work with. When we were given the clearance for takeoff, the controller said RNAV to MPAS. This is part of what's called the pencil to departure, a published departure procedure for us to follow once we become airborne. Once we take off, we'll fly straight out for a short period, then make a right turn to a point in the sky called MPAS. That will be followed by another right turn to the north. These turns can be made without the live instructions from a controller. However, once we become airborne, the tower controller will hand us off to what's called a departure controller. It's important to have controllers to keep us away from other planes and weather. As we become airborne, we get a great view of all the concourses in the middle of the airport, but take a look beyond that. Beyond all those gates are 3 more runways, essentially creating a separate airport that doesn't rely on what's happening on the northern set of runways that we just used. The only thing that the two areas have in common is the shared gate area in the middle. This truly is a unique airport because it's the world's busiest airport, and it can operate more efficiently than an airport like LaGuardia. As we climb, we turn right to MPAS on our own. We took off heading west, and Minneapolis is toward the north, so the right-hand turn seems logical. After completing the climb out, of course heading to the north will bring us closer to where we need to be, but don't always expect this to happen in Atlanta. Sometimes, depending on configurations, you may start off making a semicircle around the airport before proceeding on course. Our nose is now pointed to MPAS, and once we reach MPAS, we'll turn further right. We're leaving the control tower's airspace and will now be handed off to the departure controller.
2654, contact Farsi.
Departure Delta 2654.
About 30 miles south of us, in Peachtree City, a controller in a radar room awaits us to contact him. Let's check in with that controller now. Sorry in advance about the poor transmission quality.
3000, Delta 2654, Atlanta departure, radar contact.
The controller acknowledged us checking in by saying radar contact. The facility he's at can only see aircraft by means of radar. The controller is now going to get a turbulence report from an aircraft ahead of us, then relay the info to us.
Delta 1923, safe flight conditions. We're on suit this time. Okay, any ride complaints? There's a couple chops bumped through there, but nothing too bad. Delta 1923, roger. Delta 2654, expect occasional light chop on the departure. Delta 2654, roger.
So we're told to expect occasional light chop on departure based on the info received from the plane ahead of us. That's useful information. There's some bad weather in the area, and you can see how even though we're following a prescribed path, the controller is there to assist us in dynamic conditions. We're about to start our next right-hand turn, and it happens to be at a really good time since there's a weather cell off to our left, and this right turn will keep us away from it. By the way, I didn't feel any bumps on the climb out, but I fly so much, so maybe I'm immune to it. As we follow the published procedure by turning, we also have to adhere to published altitude restrictions. In this departure procedure, we need to climb initially to 10,000 feet, but the controller now has instructions for us to climb higher to that, to 14,000 feet.
Delta 2654, climb and maintain 14,000. Climb 14,000, Delta 2654.
We're headed to the north now, and we can climb to 14,000 feet. We're headed to a point called Pencil, and at that point, we'll point the nose toward the northwest, which is an even better heading to proceed to get to Minneapolis. Too bad there are clouds, because I always enjoy pointing out landmarks in the ground. I've got plenty of videos on this channel where I do that. If there were no clouds, passengers on the right side of the airplane would be seeing downtown Atlanta right now, because we're to the west of the city. If you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing and check out some of my other videos where the weather is better and I point out landmarks as I keep an eye out for air traffic to point out to you. This channel is all about how we fit in, and I hope I demonstrated that to you on departure. We're continuing along, and the controller will eventually hand us off to the High Altitude Atlanta Air Route Traffic Control Center, which is located in Hampton, Georgia. The controller there will clear us to our cruising altitude and will provide en route guidance. We'll talk to several air route traffic control centers along the route of flight before we begin our descent toward Minneapolis. Alas, we've made it out of the clouds, but I've got the sun in my eyes, making it harder to film. Despite the limited views, I'm satisfied as a passenger because I maintain situational awareness from taxi to takeoff to the climb, so I feel complete. And we're about to complete the time in the departure controller's airspace, so it's time for a handoff to the High Altitude Atlanta Center Controller.
Delta 2654, contact Atlanta Center 133.1.
Atlanta Center will provide higher altitudes and will guide us to the en route phase of flight. Then we'll talk to other air traffic control centers along the way. We'll catch up with the air traffic control when we descend to Minneapolis. There were clouds for most of the flight, but I'll let you enjoy some of the scenes from the left side of the plane at our cruising altitude for a few moments. Rather than flying directly towards Minneapolis, we flew more to the east, which led to the killer arrival procedure to be used. Just like the RNAV departure procedure that we flew out of Atlanta, this is a published arrival procedure that we follow toward the airport. While on the procedure, under the guidance of the High Altitude Center controllers, we descend starting at around 30 minutes from landing. Once we're closer to the terminal area, we check in with the approach controller after having spoken to previous controllers that have provided clearance to lower altitudes. The following transmission won't be the greatest, as we'll only hear the controller responding to us, but in it we'll learn a key piece of information, the fact that we'll land on runway 30 right today.
Delta 2654 approach, change transition, 30 right.
As we descend over Wisconsin, we know that runway 30 right will be the landing runway. Runway 30 right heads to the northwest, which means that landing on this runway will save time because we're already headed in that general direction. Often runway 12 left or 12 right will be the landing runway at MSP, and that means we would have to bypass the airport, swing around, and come back and land. Honestly, I would have preferred it that way because we'd have to pass around the city of Minneapolis on the left side of the plane, providing for some awesome views, but with the winds blowing the way they are tonight, runway 30 right and 30 left are the active runways. Both runways are being used for landing and departing flights. MSP Airport is quite busy this evening, and there are actually 2 approach controllers who will be handling us. We checked in with the first controller, but as we get closer to the airport, we'll have to talk to a second controller who will guide us to the runway. In large metropolitan areas, having 2 controllers can be common. There are actually controllers who work arrivals from certain directions, like flights headed from the west before they are handed off to the final approach controller. There's not much going on here in this frequency, so let's get the handoff to the next one.
Delta 2654, contact approach 119.3.
93, Delta 2654. Cross Delta 2654, 10.1, 7
Delta 2654, Minneapolis, approach flying 250 to settle in, tank 6000.
Heading 250, 10.6,000, Delta 2654.
We've been given a radar heading to fly of 250 degrees, which means we can stop following the published arrival procedure, and from this point on, we'll follow the commands of the approach controller. We're also told to descend to 6,000 feet. At this point, we need a controller to guide us, since so many planes have been following arrival procedures, and they all need to join the final approach courses safely, one behind the other, so a human is needed to separate all of the flights appropriately. Since Minneapolis is near the Wisconsin border, most of what you see below is western Wisconsin. It won't be until we're closer to the runway that we'll be flying over the state of Minnesota. That won't happen until we come out of the clouds and cross the St. Croix River, which forms the border between the 2 states of the area we'll be crossing them. The terrain here is very flat, and there are many waterways in the area, including the Mississippi River. The next command that we will receive is to turn right to Jacko. Jacko is a point on the instrument landing system to runway 30 right at 6.8 miles from touchdown. Once told to do so, we can proceed directly toward Jacko. Then upon reaching Jacko, we can turn right to line up at the runway, descend further, and land. Here, we're told to proceed to Jacko and to descend to 4,000 feet.
2654, turn right direct Jacko to settle maintain 4,000.
Right direct Jacko, descend 4,000, Delta 2654.
We're in the right turn toward Jacko and are descending to 4,000 feet. If everything goes according to plan, based upon the last transmission, we only have to make one more turn, and that's when we reach Jacko, and then point the nose to the runway. We haven't been cleared yet for the approach, but we're certainly set up for it. Now keep in mind that we're landing on runway 30 right today, but aircraft are also being vectored in to land on runway 30 left simultaneously, but that's occurring on a different frequency. As we get closer to the runway, we'll actually see one of the aircraft approaching from the opposite direction as it prepares to line up with the parallel runway. It's almost like a separate operation at the same airport. Also keep in mind that the approach controller can't vector too many planes too close to each other because on the ground for both runway 30 right and 30 left are planes waiting to take off, and there needs to be sufficient space between arrivals for planes to depart. Departure clearance is handled by the control tower at the airport, but the approach controller needs to help facilitate this. All air traffic control facilities need to work closely with each other. The TRACON is a separate area from the control tower, but good communication and coordination between the 2 different kinds of control areas is very important for the safe operation of the airport and the surrounding airspace itself. The wide river that you see is the St. Croix River. Once we cross it, we'll be in Minnesota. Forming a T at the end of the river is the Mississippi River, which we'll have a much better view of as we continue along. For now, the controller is going to point out the airport to us. It's in our 1 o'clock position, 20 miles away.
Delta 2654, airport, 1 o'clock, 20 miles.
Field side, Delta 2654.
Even though we're proceeding to a point on the instrument landing system, Jacko, the controller is indicating to us that we might just be cleared to fly to the runway visually. We do have the airport in sight from up here, so we'll probably get a clearance for a visual approach. In the meantime, we're told to slow down. There are other planes in the area, and the runway is being used for departures, too.
Delta 2654, reduce speed to 190.
Speed 190, Delta 2654.
We're told to reduce our speed to 190 knots as we take in a great view of the Mississippi River. The controller is going to clear us for the visual approach to runway 30 right. We'll be told to cross the 12-mile marker from landing at or above 4,000 feet. Then we can descend to land. The elevation of the runway above sea level is 820 feet. Let's get that approach clearance now.
Delta 2654, cross 12 GME at about 4,000, cleared visual approach, runway 30 right.
Cross 12 DME at above 4,000, cleared visual approach 30 right, Delta 2654.
Delta 2654, reduce speed to 170.
Speed 170, Delta 2654.
The controller came back and told us to slow down even further to 170 knots, but that's still not slow enough. The controller knows that there will be departing traffic before us on the same runway that we're about to land on, so he's going to ask us to try to reduce our speed to 150 knots. The slower, the better, of course, to allow as many aircraft as possible to become airborne before us. He's also going to point out traffic that will be landing on the parallel runway. He will say that the traffic will be in our 10 o'clock position in 4 miles, and it's descending out of 4,500 feet. It's an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737. This plane is coming in from the west, which is where most Alaska Airlines planes come from, and it's actually headed toward us before it makes a left-hand turn to line up with runway 30 left. Since the controller said the plane is in our 10 o'clock position, we should be able to see it from our side of the airplane, but I don't have it in sight yet.
Delta 2654, if you're able for departure spacing, reduce speed to 150. Delta 2654, thanks. And you do have traffic at your 10 o'clock, 4 miles to the south parallel, Alaska Boeing 737, descending at a 4.5.
Delta 2654, searching.
Let's keep an eye out for that Alaska 737 off our left. The pilot in the cockpit will be doing the same. We're slowing down to 150 knots, which is pretty slow. This will allow the controller in the control tower at the airport to launch flights for departure prior to our touchdown. It's a pretty busy time here at MSP. Okay, now I can start to see that Alaska 737, and the only way I'm able to see it is because I'm able to spot the white light on the plane. Do you see it? It's just over the horizon, above the area where you see the river below. We'll eventually lose sight of the plane, and it'll be making a left-hand turn to line up with runway 30 left, keeping clear of us. We're getting closer to landing. It's now time for the approach controller to hand us off to the tower controller so that we can get clearance to land on runway 30 right. Before doing the handoff, the controller will remind us of that Alaska Airlines flight just off our left side. Then we'll get the frequency for the Minneapolis control tower.
Delta 2654, traffic just off your left side, descending out of 4,000 now. Contact tower 123.95, thanks for help.
123.95, Delta 2654.
Okay, let's call the tower. As we check in, the tower will give us some important information regarding the status of the traffic and wind.
Tower, Delta 2654, visual 30 right.
Over 2654 Minneapolis Tower traffic holding in position. Reduce the final approach speed. Wind 330 at 15, gust 24. Runway 30 right, clear to land.
30 right, clear to land, reduce the final approach speed. 64.
Even though she said we were cleared to land, she let us know that there will be departure traffic holding in position on the runway ahead of us and that we should reduce to our final approach speed. We're also informed of the wind, which is coming from 330 degrees at 15 knots, and there are also gusts up to 24 knots. The departure traffic has to take off before we land, otherwise we can't land, and now the controller comes back to let us know that the traffic will take off when we're 2 miles out for landing.
Delta 2654 traffic will be rolling when you're about a 2-mile final.
Delta 2654, roger.
You might have noticed that we made some final adjustments to line up with the runway. We're on a visual approach, and we can no longer see that Alaska 737 off to our left. Since we turned to the right to line up, it's slightly behind us. We will not hear the Alaska 737 get clearance to land on runway 30 left because the pilot is talking to a separate controller on a different tower frequency. Just like our controller, that controller is also located in the tower at the airport and is handling both arriving and departing flights on the parallel runway. As we get closer to the runway, we fly over Egan and Mendota Heights. Of course, from up ahead, the pilot can see the runway, and on the runway is a plane sitting in position, awaiting takeoff clearance. What I like here is that the controller let our pilot know exactly when that plane will be issued takeoff clearance. That's when we hit 2 miles out. It's close, but it provides enough separation between us and that departure. There are many reasons why an aircraft would get takeoff clearance while we're 2 miles out from landing. There could be a plane on the runway that just landed ahead and needs to vacate the runway. The departing plane may be too close to the previous departure and more separation is needed between the two planes, and that's achieved by issuing a late takeoff clearance. Or there could be traffic crossing the runway on the ground control frequency, so clearance won't occur until the crossing traffic is fully clear of the runway. I didn't hear much on this frequency, so I'm not 100% certain of the delay in the takeoff roll. I didn't hear the controller telling an arriving flight to vacate the runway, so I think there could be traffic crossing the runway or more separation is needed between departures. We're now 2 miles out, and as expected, the controller is going to issue takeoff clearance to the aircraft in position on the runway.
Delta 2824, wind is 330 at 15, 24, turn right heading 320, runway 30 right, cleared for immediate takeoff.
All right, heading 320, 30 right, cleared for takeoff, Delta 2824 rolling.
She issued an immediate takeoff clearance to the plane on the runway. At the end of the pilot's transmission, he said rolling, which is reassuring, and it means that he started the takeoff roll. That pilot was also given a heading to fly after takeoff. I'm happy that airplane is rolling now so we can land, although I have to admit it's always a bit exciting if we had to go around. On this channel, I have a video coming into MSP where we do line up with the runway, but have to come off of the approach due to traffic. In any case, we'll be landing just after we overfly the Minnesota River below. While over the runway, seconds before touchdown, keep an eye out for 4 airplanes on the adjacent taxiway waiting to take off. This runway is in high demand, and I'm glad I was able to show you how we fit in between departures. Runway 30 right is 8,200 feet long. It intersects with a crosswind runway, runway 422, which is rarely used. We'll actually land and go through the intersection of the runway. As we touch down, the controller will tell the first of 4 airplanes that were waiting to take off to line up on the runway behind us.
Skywards 4291, Minneapolis tower traffic at the outer metro runway 30 right, sign up and wait.
The Delta airplane that received takeoff clearance when we were on a 2-mile final is now airborne and leaving the controller's airspace and is told to contact Minneapolis Departure Control now.
Delta 2824, contact departure. Good night.
Delta 2824, have a good night.
We're now told to vacate the runway and look out for 737 on the taxiway that we're turning onto, but it won't interfere with their taxi route.
Delta 2654, the 73 is going to continue. If you have Mike, just pass behind them or go to Papa 9.
We can make Mike go past there on 73 Delta 2654.
Thank you, Delta 2654. Contact ground point 9.
Ground point 9, Delta 2654.
A look back reveals a plane in position on our runway with traffic behind it, as well as traffic for the parallel runway. I wasn't able to capture our pilot contacting ground control as we were instructed to do so, but I do have the command from the ground controller, also in the tower, who tells us to cross runway 4 and taxiway Papa. From there, we can taxi into the ramp, which is straight ahead in the C concourse.
2654 Metro Papa, cross runway 4, unit will be at Quebec, no factor for you.
Our gate today will be Charlie 1, the very first gate of Concourse C. Well, I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. As always, I strive to provide a very unique perspective of flight, making what seems like an ordinary experience into something memorable. While 95% of the passengers had their window shades down, I kept an eye outside, keeping aware as to where I was at all times. If you're a passenger on a commercial airline flight, I urge you to try to examine your journey from this point of view. Don't worry yourself too much with passenger issues, delays, or cabin service. It's the joy and understanding of flight that makes the experience worthwhile. And it's not over yet. Here's that plane that was waiting for us to clear the runway before it could take off. So if you like what you saw, I invite you to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and hit the bell button. Like the many videos like this I've presented in the past, there's so much more to come. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Welcome to the Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport.